I had one goal, which was to start a business so I could say no to the job offer from Deloitte Consulting at the end of the 3 years. And genuinely, that was from day one. That was my one goal. I yearned for something with a bit more independence. And I felt that I'd been given this massive leg up by having that experience before college, because the grad recruiters, they go hard at you for those 3 years and make it sound like this amazing world without limits. And I'd had that experience. And so I was like, no, I can dream for something bigger. And because my dad's an accountant, that was a very clear next step of a very good, healthy, robust job. And so I knew I needed an alternative. I couldn't just say no to them. I needed something better to be able to say no with.
Welcome to the Cashflow Fight Club podcast. In the Champions Corner edition, I'm Mike Deaton, and together with Lydia, my co-host in life, business, and this podcast, we're taking you into the training room, deep in the dojo, sharing the secrets of what it takes to forge a champion. We're digging deep into mindset mastery, high-performance habits, best-in-class behaviors, and bringing you the tips and techniques that maximize human potential, brought to you from some of the best in the business.
So grab your buds and your seat. Hit subscribe and get ready to up your game. Let's do the show.
Let's do it. Today, we have the great pleasure to sit down with Andrew Davies, CMO at Paddle. Paddle has raised over $295 million to build out the complete payments infrastructure for high-growth software companies, currently serving over 4,000 customers. Previously, Andrew was VP Corporate Marketing at Optimizely after it acquired Idio, the business he co-founded. During his time at Optimizely, he and the team integrated 5 acquisitions, entirely rebranded the company, and grew sales significantly. As co-founder and CMO, he helped build Idio from concept to a market leader in B2B content personalization, raising over $13 million in capital and serving large enterprise clients. Andrew also advises SaaS scale-ups and sits on the board of 90, an agile digital transformation consultancy which serves the insurance industry and gives 90% of its distributable profits to alleviate global poverty. He lives with his wife and 2 children in the Devonshire countryside in the UK. He also happens to be the brother-in-law of Lydia and I. Let's jump into the Champions Corner with Andrew Davies.
Andrew Davies, thanks for coming on the show today. We're excited to pick your brain a little bit.
My absolute pleasure. This will be fun.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yes, Andrew, we are so happy you're here.
Yeah, great storyline you've got there across the pond. So as we were just talking about, I think it would be fun to explore a little bit your early days of entrepreneurship. And I know you started a company, Idio, at some point back, and maybe tell us a little bit about pre-background, but then a little bit into that story.
Sure thing. So it goes a bit further behind the starting of Idio in that I was going to university. My dad's an accountant. And as part of my planning for university, I thought I need to go and get a scholarship that could pay for my course, so my college course. So I applied and got accepted on quite a prestigious course, which is Deloitte's scholarship program. So Deloitte Consulting, one of the big 4. And they pay you through your college degree and you go and work there for a year before university and then through each summer holiday and winter holiday. And so I got on this course, was in technology, media and telecoms, doing audit, and then moved into strat consulting for them up in London. And that was huge for me, massively expanded my horizons. Was thrown in the deep end. You're a 17-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid, and you're charged out at kind of grad rates and you just have to learn on the job. Really fun. But
and just maybe to back up a little bit, before that, you grew up and live in southwestern England, right? So I guess going to London and doing all that would be an eye-opener.
Exactly. Country bumpkin, moving up to London, first time ever living there, living with my relatives on the outskirts in the suburbs. I remember putting on my misfitting polyester suit on the first day to go in and pretend I knew what I was doing. But at the end of that first year, I then went for my first year of college, first year of university to study business. And I had one goal, which was to start a business so I could say no to the job offer from Deloitte Consulting at the end of the 3 years. And genuinely, that was from day one. That was my one goal. And,
wow. Why was that? Like you just had a entrepreneurial spirit, or you had some foreshadowing of what life in a big consulting company was going to be like?
Both of those 2 things. I loved my time there, but I yearned for something with a bit more independence. And I felt that I'd been given this massive leg up by having that experience before college, because the grad recruiters, they go hard at you for those 3 years and make it sound like this amazing world without limits. and I'd had that experience. And so I was like, no, I can dream for something bigger. And because my dad's an accountant, that was a very clear next step of a very good, healthy, robust job. And so I knew I needed an alternative. I couldn't just say no to them. I needed something better to be able to say no with. So yeah, that was why.
Interesting. Yeah,
And
that struck out to me when you mentioned the scholarship, that you actually worked before you went into the education system. And I think that's a great setup, really. But obviously, it gave you a taste of what things could be like on the backside of that. So,
I for some reason, I always just had that, and I think it's learned from my parents, always had that grit to go and work. I even remember having won that scholarship, which I knew was fully paid and was going to be a great experience. Even 3 weeks before that, working through Exeter High Street where I grew up and taking a job as a double glazing window salesperson, selling extensions to houses in a smoke-filled office where you could only hit your quota if you managed to lie to a few old women. And walking out after 2 hours on the job because I realized I couldn't do it. My soul would be sold if I managed to do this. But even then, knowing I had a job lined up, I went to get another job while I was doing it. So I always wanted to get stuck in. So yes, that was the journey to university. And then when I got to university, I was on the lookout for someone to start a business with from the first day.
that's great. And I imagine that was not difficult to do given the program you were in and probably a little bit the spirit of other students that were in your class.
You'd hope so. The Entrepreneurship Club was the biggest kind of club on campus, and yet it was just a social party. Actually, most of the people there were just wanting to have fun. They weren't looking at start businesses. And it was hard. It took me a little while. It took me a month or so. And I was looking carefully because there were a lot of people who wanted to think that they were entrepreneurs, but didn't want to put in hard yards. And so I met my first co-founder there, and we just started connecting, started thinking through business ideas. And we landed on what we thought was the hardest industry to break into. And we thought if we start there, then everything after this will be easy. So as two straight-laced 18-year-olds with very little idea of fashion, we thought, let's start a top-end women's wear fashion label. And then anything we do in life afterwards would be easy. And so that was my first business, was top-end women's apparel.
Wow.
And ended up in court in my second year of university. So it didn't go very well.
What was patent infringement or?
No, much less interesting than that. But nowadays, the topic of crowdsourcing is much more popular. And so this was actually crowdsourced fashion before that was a thing many moons ago. And so what we did was we created a brief for a new top-end women's wear fashion collection. We went to all of the top fashion colleges, Birmingham Institute, London College of Fashion, Central St. Martin's in the UK, wrote blanket cold emails to all of these students and said, look, we're starting this label. This is the brand. If you submit designs, we will accept the best ones. We will fund them to be produced into samples, and we'll give you a royalty based on any we sell into retailers and wholesalers. And so there was no risk to them other than the work. We carried the risk of all the selling and funding the sample manufacture. And so that was the model. We went out, we got a big deal. For us, it was a big deal. It was about $25,000, about £15,000 in those days from our first buyer, a boutique, who then proceeded to go bust before we delivered the final amount of the clothes. And so they sued us for wrongful sizing, which literally is there's no standard sizing for women's clothes. And so it wasn't really a case. And so we had to countersue them to get our money back. And we didn't get it all back, but we got enough. But we learned a lot from that business, many things, and we can dive into that if it's interesting. But the one thing we did well of the many things we did badly was that we built a good website, we built a good digital presence. And so we learned that there was one thing out of that business we could take on to the next one, which was doing stuff online.
What time frame was this? What year?
Oh, goodness me. 2003, 4, it's 2004, 2005.
Yeah, I was just thinking website technology, what era we're in.
Very early, yeah. Andrew typing in Dreamweaver to try and work out how to make the spacing work on the homepage. Very early. In fact, I remember that it was the Spring-Summer 06 collection that they purchased. So there you go, that dates it.
Okay.
And then that's the one that we ended up in court with.
All right.
This makes me think a little bit of the power of unexpected teacher, which I really like that concept. It sounds like that was an unexpected teacher for you.
100%. I'm a big fan of the Winston Churchill definition of success, which is limping from one failure to the next with no loss of enthusiasm. And so I think all of those different experiences give you something to learn from every day as a school day.
Yeah, as an entrepreneur, it's almost essential or unavoidable, let's say, to do that. I would say very few people have it right out of the gates. It was interesting. I didn't know that. All right. You went from your first idea. Then how did it roll out after that? So I guess you stayed with your partner and you guys kept brainstorming other ideas, or did you pivot slightly, or did you make a big jump?
No, that was dead and buried, that one. There was nothing to pivot from. And so we then tried new things. We tried a translation business. I can't even remember. I've got a notebook somewhere of all the different things we tried and tested. And eventually we landed on just a very basic concept of building websites for the people we can market to and reach. So it ended up being schools, B&Bs, hotels, accounting firms, architecture firms. We hit on a couple of trends there that helped us sell. Public companies having to list investor presentations and investor news and their price. There were regulations going through in the UK at that time that meant they had to upgrade their digital properties. And then we ended up finding a niche, which was social analytics. So this was in the very early days of Facebook and Twitter. And so we built for ITV, one of the big broadcasters like CNBC or similar in the US, we built visualizations of sports matches based on Twitter sentiment that would show which team was winning based on the kind of positive or negative sentiment online.
Mhm.
We built the first for number 10 Downing Street, a
Wow.
government office, a whole bunch of interesting projects, but it was an agency model where we would win a project, find some people around campus to help us deliver it. We ended up finding a couple of engineers that were really good, so we didn't have to type in Dreamweaver ourselves. And by the time I got to my third year, where I graduated, we had a business that was producing profit and had a couple of staff. And it was at that point I made a big change to go into Idio, which we can talk about. But yeah, by the end of university, we then had something I could take to my dad and say, actually, we're gonna try going alone rather than going on with Deloitte.
Brilliant. Yeah, I wanted to ask that exactly who was doing the back end work, but it sounds like you would recruit talent to be doing that. So it's
We did, but not always. When it was brochure sites, we built them ourselves. And actually, the bridge story of that, it was called Through Digital, Through Sites and then Through Digital. The bridge story of Through Digital into Idio was that myself and my co-founder, he's still a friend to this day, Charles, we would just horse trade jobs that we didn't like amongst the pool of clients we had. Remember, we had been asked to speak at the very final year at the Young Entrepreneurs Conference on campus. Now, I'm perfectly fine with public speaking. Throw me up in front of anyone and I'll try and wave my hands and say something and it'll turn out okay. And my co-founder, Charles, that just wasn't one of his strengths. He's really strong in lots of other areas, superb operator. So I can remember sitting there on the night before this conference and he said, Andrew, I just don't want to do this. You go and do this. If you do this, I'll pick up your nastiest client. So I can remember today, he ended up staying at home, building this horrible website for someone that I really didn't want to do because it was very complicated. And I went out to this conference and it was there that I met my next co-founder. We ended up all working together, but I met him at that conference where I was telling the story of what we'd done at university. And his dad was the keynote speaker there, who was a successful entrepreneur who just exited his business. And so that was the bridge into the next business, which was a software business that we ended up scaling.
That's interesting. So I think I find this very common among entrepreneurs where what you start with doesn't end up being what you end up with, right? So you guys had, it sounds like a very open-mindedness and a willingness to just take jobs, pivot, figure out where's the market, where is the next job going to come from, and a mindset of we can figure out how to make it work. So you were out, I don't know what your pitches were like to get number 10 Downing Street app or those kind of things. Were those just through networking, or were you actively out there courting different types of business and just saying, yeah, we can do it?
Yeah, we had no network at all. And so this was just cold email outbound. And then because of some of the work we won, we would then parlay that into kind of some press pieces that other people would get.
Sure.
I can remember walking across muddy fields to find school premises that we'd got lost at when we got the bus to the wrong end of town and traipsing into headmasters' offices to try and tell them their school needed a new website. So it was all the way from that to finding some interesting ways of getting into larger companies. And as you pointed out, it was early enough in those days that anybody had a chance as long as you could talk smart, you could demonstrate progress, you weren't overcharged. And I believe we gave great value to those customers because it was crazy cheap what we do now. And yeah, so we really enjoyed those days of hustle. And to your point, it's just, for me, this process of learning and finding that where that river goes is really key, because it's very rare, I find, that people have an idea at the beginning that ends up being exactly the same as the strategy they unpack over multiple months, let alone years. And listening to the market, I think, is a really important trait to understand what the market is telling you, not falling in love with your idea, but listening to what the customers say.
That's critical. Even if you think about the big companies, Amazons and Facebooks, and okay, maybe their core business model is somewhat the same as what it started with, but they have evolved and shifted and built new platforms around the central tenant and things like that. So yeah, I think for young entrepreneurs and It's really critical, as you said, not get overly attached to the one idea and listen to the market.
Yeah.
And
And that was
I'm
our story with Idio. We started off with something that ended up being something completely different. So go for it, Idio.
I'm really curious, Andrew, how did you stay motivated during this time of trial, errors,
and error.
trial? And how did you stay motivated to keep on pushing forward?
So I have massive respect for anyone who is a solo founder. So one of the
Mm.
biggest things was I had someone alongside me who was equally as motivated. And so when I was in the trough, he'd be at the peak, and there's a way of balancing that out. You have that in relationships and marriages, but I think it's really important in your co-founder relationship. So that was really important. And I don't think I could have done it without someone alongside me to balance that out. But also, I was really blessed to start this journey early enough when I didn't have much to lose. Again, I have massive respect for people who jump into an entrepreneurial journey when they're later on in life, when they've got dependents, when they've got a reputation to risk. I had none of that. There's nothing to risk. We were in university dorms. Yes, maybe a bit of credit card debt, maybe a bit of eating cheap. And we worked hard. We made a commitment to each other for the first 2 terms to sleep 4 hours a night, to do our classes, to then spend every other waking moment on the business, and then to sleep 4 hours a night. And we were shattered at the end of those first 2 semesters, but it gave us the time in the day when everyone else was out partying or playing tennis to really push something forwards. And so I think it was the combination of all of those things, and just a total lack of embarrassment about egg on our face when things went wrong.
I will echo that. Really, I tell this story quite often, but I, I lived the reverse of you. Like I went to university, I got a corporate job, climbed the ladder, but it was exactly that. Like I very early got married, started a family, had a mortgage, had a car, and my tolerance for risk was almost non-existent. Like I had to provide for a family. And over those years, I can't say that there were dozens of ideas that popped into my head or things that looked attractive that were more entrepreneurial in nature, but I had no ability to go and pursue any of those things because for me, the perceived risk was way too big. And it was only after a combination of factors that one being married to Lygia, and she's just very supportive and has a different risk tolerance than I do. Our children were older and a bit out of the house and going to university. We were both laid off. So we had a literal choice in front of us to go back into the workforce. So all these things lined up in such a way that we said, hey, let's take a risk and let's go the entrepreneurial route and try something different. But it was only really for me with those. And also we had some money in the bank, which was another big cushion to be able to fall back on. There was a series of de-risking events or variables for me that allowed me to take the pivot. Whereas in those early days, felt really trapped and almost bound into my path that I had no flexibility or freedom to switch out of that. So I think that's a really important point. I watch our daughters do it today, right? They're just plowing into shackles of very limited degrees of freedom because they're getting debts, whether it's a lease on an apartment or credit cards or car or all these things. And I'm like, no, don't do it. You aren't going to be able to move, but it all works out and we do our own thing. But yeah, those are 2 very important things I think you bring up. Having a partner, especially one that complements in both ways, complements your skill sets, but also can elevate you is just essential to pulling this. It is, I couldn't imagine doing many of these things as a solo or a solo business person today. It'd be really challenging, I think. But there are also communities and different things that you can plug into that can give you that short of a formal partnership.
Yeah, no, totally.
Let's keep going chronologically forward. Idio came about, which give us, I guess you're nearing the end or ending your university career and you're still with your original partner, just found what you thought was a good niche to pursue.
Yeah, absolutely. So the big difference was the business model. So both in technology, but we were an agency. And I could see that, every client we won, there was a margin hit as we then had to fund the delivery of that website.
Mhm.
Quality was really important. And any agency business, I think they could be great businesses, but they're not high margin businesses usually, especially in those early days where everything was bespoke. And so I met this new co-founder, Ed, who ended up working together for 10 odd years afterwards. And he was a maths genius, still is genius in many ways, but definitely he had very strong maths competency. And I remember the first time I met him, he showed me on paper a whole bunch of Bayesian algorithms and said, look, we're going to build a personalization business. Do you want in? Are you going to come and join me? He showed some kind of cred on getting started. And so we basically built a business that started off being a consumer personalized publisher. So if you imagine Flipboard before Twitter was a data set, we said, okay, everyone buys magazines at the supermarket, the grocery stores, but they only read a small bit of it. Why don't we aggregate all of that content together and only deliver you the bit of content you're interested in? So to do that, we have to understand your interests and then deliver the right amount of content. And our test version of this was a music magazine. So it was called Idio Mag, and we aggregated content and built up content relationships from Billboard and Rolling Stone and about 200 small music blogs. We then had had an approach of classifying that content based on whether it's shoegazing, punk, or opera, or whatever it might be. And then users could come in and they could give us their fingerprint of music history based on iMeme or Pandora or Last.fm. There were loads of music databases and music social networks that were blowing up at that time. And then based on that quick snap of what they listened to, we could give them a magazine that was based on those interests. That was the concept. And it was a long and winding road. We made every mistake in the book, but we got that business over a year or so, maybe 2 years, into a point where it was break even on us two and a developer. And so we got to that point of, okay, this is now a just about stable business. And then realized that once again, this wasn't a business model that could scale. We had probably 100, maybe 150,000 active users a month, and the ad revenue was paying for everything. But the publishing industry was exploding. The music industry was exploding, both in a negative way, court cases all over the place. And we realized that the value in the business was in this algorithmic approach to classifying content to build personalization. And so we then went on an endeavor to rebuilding what we had as a multi-tenant SaaS solution for big companies rather than as a B2C, a consumer proposition that people came and read. So yeah, that was the basic journey of those first few years, was just test and learn, realize we messed up.
But that's good. I mean, you were able to sustain some time, years, it sounds like, of testing and iterating, and then pivoting into probably a much healthier marketplace in a B2B world where you're providing solutions for larger companies rather than on a consumer basis. Yeah, that was great.
That's a very different go-to-market model.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess at some point, even that altered a little bit. So you were providing some of this customized content, and I guess for at least that type of personalization, or I don't know how you would phrase it, but this individual, I don't want to say shopping behavior, but individual interest behavior or interest model started coming into being, and you guys shifted into that more. Is that right?
Yeah. To start off with, we were just doing personalized. Our first two clients were Diageo, the big drinks manufacturer, and Unilever, the big CPG firm. And we were delivering personalized content for their customers as part of our kind of marketing ploy, opening more emails if it's more personalized, stay on the website longer if it's more personalized. But it was quite an endeavor to go from just doing this for music to doing it for every topic under the sun. And so actually the twist in this journey is we went back and acqui-hired my former agency that I'd started with Charles, because that by that point had a 6 or 8 person full-time development team that were specialists in social media analytics, which is very similar in its technical background. How do you aggregate large volumes of content, analyze it for meaning, then use that to do stuff? And so we went back, merged the companies, and went on from there.
So with Idio, you guys had an initial B2C personalization concept. It sounds like you scaled that to some degree, but saw that there wasn't necessarily a lot of scale beyond where you were with, I think you said you had around 100.
Definitely was market-led. I can remember turning up at a bunch of potential big advertisers in our personalized music magazine and being told, look, we don't really care about your 100,000 active users, but if you could help us personalize our digital properties, our websites, our email programs for our audience, then that's really interesting. And after hearing that 3 or 4 or 5 times when you're in the office of a big automotive manufacturer or a big consumer packaged goods manufacturer, then you think, oh, okay, I get the hint. You don't really want to just drop a bit of money on ads in our magazine. You're interested in the actual concept. So it was market-led, and that led us to go back and think through what would it take to go and build this out. So we had to go from music as a topic area to everything as topic areas. We had to make sure the commercial model was different. We had to make sure the interfaces that we built so that people could use them would be different. And so that took a while, and it was probably about a year's worth of work in the background for a very skinny team at that point to be doing. And then also we made sure we pre-sold. So you have to be really careful, particularly with enterprises, of selling something that doesn't exist yet. But it's a tactic that many entrepreneurs do in order to validate that market need. And if you're authentic about the timelines it's going to take for you to deliver what you've said, then you effectively can sell consulting projects as a SaaS license, right? And that's really what we did. And so we landed a contract with Unilever and a contract with Diageo, each for a sub-brand of them. And effectively, we were assigning a 12-month software license for them to use our personalization software. But really, the first month or two of that was us building the capabilities for us to service that need and then launching it. And so that's how we flexed into this. And then after that, went through the painful experience of realizing that both of those companies saw us as a little innovation spend that they weren't going to renew after a year or two. But we'd then hooked the business onto this B2B model and had to go and win lots more clients and spend the next years doing that with varying degrees of success in various markets until we found a real home territory that we were able to scale.
Yeah.
And went through quite a big decision as a business later on. We could talk about that focus on an ideal customer. So yeah, that was the journey of going from consumer to B2B.
Really interesting. Yeah. And so again, I think similar to your early days, you guys were listening to the market, clients, and then going off and engineering a solution in a way. So there's a lot of renewed focus on that model these days. I can't remember, oh gosh, I'm drawing a complete blank, but I know there's a book that's come out recently called, I think it's called something to the effect of, build $1 million business in a weekend. I can't remember the founder that came up with this book, but one of the core tenets is prove your idea out before you go start spending a lot of money in a website and marketing and a logo and doing all this thing. Go out and approach people and say, hey, would you buy this if I put it together? So that pioneering mindset again for you guys.
Yeah, 100%.
I know a little bit from your background, just because we know each other, but I know you had in mind from early days a vision of starting a company with the intent of some kind. Tell me a little bit about that and if and how that framed your leadership of a business. If you did things differently or if you just did things the same, I'm curious because I think a lot of people have in mind this idea, like I'm going to start a business, I'm going to sell it, I'm going to have my exit and then be able to do something. And I'm curious how that went for you guys, if you just went about building a great, healthy business or if you did certain things to position yourself so that you could be acquired.
Yeah, and I think for us, it was the moment when we went into B2B and then raised money to go and build a business after we'd won those first two clients. That was solidified. So before then, there were many options open to us. We could just build a business and make revenues, make profits, and then draw those. We were bootstrapping effectively, although we'd had some seed money from my co-founder's father. But even in those times, we knew that it was highly likely the most capital return would come from an acquisition rather than just from yielding over time a margin. And I think about this a bit different nowadays, but yes, that's what we thought. And then when we raise money, suddenly you've got this responsibility to return shareholders' capital. You've got people who you're working with on month in, month out basis who have trusted you with their capital and their reputations. And so you've got a responsibility to find a way to return that. And I take that responsibility really seriously. And so certainly from the moment we raised institutional money and money from independent angels, that was something that was not a whether it could be done. It was a when, not an if. And once you take that money, there's going to have to be a way of repaying it. And yes, you do think about your business differently. There's a few things that you think about differently. Software businesses, generally, they are valued on that growth rate that they are achieving. And the higher growth you are, the more your valuation multiple goes up. And therefore, most software companies raise capital in order to grow as fast as possible. Yes, you're trying to build IP and product, but you're spending a lot of that on go-to-market once you've reached product market fit. Because if you are not growing as fast as you could be, then you won't be as valued. Your multiple won't be as valuable. And so we spent years trying to find a market that we could grow into. And then we spent those last couple of years before exit on making sure we grew as fast as possible into that market. So you think very differently about it because you're not trying to eke out a margin. You're not trying to build sustainable business. You're trying to make sure that growth rate is as high as possible. And that leads you into some very dark situations sometimes when your money's running out much faster than your options are coming to you. And we had many situations where we were raising bridge financing or debt to cover the gaps or putting back in personal savings at points in order to make sure we could get there. So it was a very risky business that we have a big survivor bias afterwards, right? Because we got there and we sold it, but there's many people who don't manage to muscle through those processes, and that's no shame on them. It's just you just make a few things work against you, or you make a few small mistakes or a couple of extra mistakes and it doesn't work out. Then also you have to think about who's going to buy you. And you've got to start building those relationships because it's rare that someone buys you who you've got no relationship with prior. usually some form of commercial partner. And so you've got to think about raising awareness with the partners that could be your acquirer in the future. And then as you get closer to that, you've got to think about brokers and whether there's third parties that need to be in the mix. So yes, you do think about it differently from the operational angle of what you're trying to drive in the KPIs and the relationships you're trying to build. And then as you get close to it, you actually have to manage that sale process.
Yeah, super interesting. It reminds me of a lot of brick and mortar businesses like franchises or retail that do a very similar thing, right? They're just putting store after store across the US anyway. I don't know how it is in Europe, but in the US, it's very similar because they want that growth on the metrics and in the shareholder reports quarterly that they can then, I don't know that they're looking, franchises are probably positioning for some kind of a sale or an exit, but a lot of people just want their shareholder growth. I was also listening here, it's $200 billion, I think, for next year that different tech companies and non-tech companies for that matter have allocated towards spend. And there's no revenue growth that is going to support that. And so it is a very winner take all mentality, right? People are going all in. And to your point about survivor mentality, there's going to be some losers, right? But in order to win, you have to go all in, right? You either are not going to play or you're putting all your chips in to capture a significant share of what will be a dominant market going forward. So yeah, interesting take on how to position yourself. So let's maybe take a strong pivot out of the world of Idio and or maybe let's stay with it a little bit. So I know you guys did eventually get acquired, and so a little bit about that process maybe. So things that you just relayed in terms of demonstrating a good steep growth curve, forming some relationships on the side for a future partner or someone to acquire you happened. And that's how your acquisition happened?
Yeah, some of that. And then we had our own nuance on the journey too. We ended up being a business that was selling to too many different customer types. And so we made a call. This was about 2 years before exit to focus and bet the entire house on one customer, one target customer, which we defined as enterprise B2B tech in America. So we actually started losing some customers that didn't sit in that segment. And we started winning.
So not one customer, but one category of
exactly one customer type. Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Because then you could market in the same way. They go to the same events. You could use the same vocabulary. You could hire the sales reps that speak to that market, and the product development becomes much easier because you're only supporting one set of use cases. And before that, things were very difficult because we were spreading ourselves so thin to that decision. It was a really difficult decision to come to. After that decision, then we saw that growth rate start to increase. And frankly, we had a set of shareholders that had been brought on board at different times in different circumstances and therefore had different aspirations for the business. And that was one of our big challenges. We were spending a lot of time, an increasing amount of time, managing the alignment of our shareholders rather than building the actual business. And that was one of our impetuses to be up for being sold and wanting to go and get sold. And people regularly say the best companies aren't sold, they're bought. And that's true. But you also have to be pragmatic in your circumstance. And if we were going to sit around and wait for someone to come along and buy us, then it could be a very long time. And so we did manufacture that sales process. We were very clear over what we wanted. And our chairman was very instrumental. He'd been a public markets chairman previously, a CEO previously. So he knew many of the public market investors. And so we actually set a dual track strategy where we built the business to have a small cap IPO on the UK AIM market, the alternative investment market. And once we'd got the cornerstone investors for that, then we went to trade buyers, some of which we knew, and drummed up some offers, one of which we then took. And so we created that competitiveness ourselves rather than it coming to us, and that got us the outcome we needed. And yeah, the whole team moved across. We joined a bigger company, and I spent 2 years working there, running global marketing before I left.
Nice. All right. Cinderella story. Just like it was meant to be.
Lots of pain and almost going every few months of the journey, though.
That's great. Okay. Now I would like to maybe shift gears a little bit. I know you like to give back to young entrepreneurs and you do a bit of coaching for other aspiring business people and entrepreneurs. Give us a little rundown on what that entails. And I'm curious as we get a bit deeper into it as to or traits that other people listening might be able to pick up on.
Yeah, of course. So I remember having a really instrumental conversation with a friend of mine who was coaching me in that moment, a lady called Nicola, who was still a CMO advisor in London. And I was talking to her about how I felt constrained at Idio, that I was in one topic, one market, and I'd been in it a long time and I wasn't learning enough. I'm someone who really values variety. And she said, why don't you challenge yourself and your board to go down to 4 days a week and do your Idio job in 4 days a week, so you have a day free to do some contracting, consulting, advisory, whether paid or not, so you learn from other contexts. And that's what we did. A month later, I'd gone to my shareholders and said that, can we do this as a trial for 6 months? And if it doesn't work, and if I don't perform, then I'll go straight back up to full-time again. And let's face it, I'll probably do a full-time role within the 5 days anyway. But what I want is the freedom to be able to take on some other, whether fractional advisory type roles, whether paid or not, so that I see other contexts. And this was probably a year or a year and a half before our acquisition. And it added so much richness into my week, because then I had the freedom to say yes to some people in capacities that I wouldn't have been able to previously. So then when we were acquired, I carried forwards that 1 day a week freedom into the role at the acquirer. And in both of those contexts, it was just so good to have that ability to say yes. And yeah, many of those relationships weren't paid. They were just me helping out in any way I could. Mm-hmm. And then some of them developed into paid relationships. But it was always coming from the perspective that it wasn't my primary job. I didn't need it. Therefore, I could be helpful first. And it was only if people needed significant amount of time or regular time in the diary that we formalized something. And I still do that to the day, to today, mostly in an informal capacity. I sit on a board or two, but mostly informally, just if people are asking for help, I'll make time in my diary, and I have time in my diary every week to do that. Not from a perspective that I've got answers, but a lot of the challenge that people have is just not seeing the wood from the trees and wanting someone who's external just to give a little bit of reflection as to what things might look like if you were on the outside looking in.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Were these, so it sounds like these were largely just organic connections that were looking for help, or people that were in your network, or maybe a second degree network that were looking for a bit of help?
Yeah, exactly. And it was just saying yes to a few people that I previously felt I couldn't say yes to because I didn't have the permission. I was meant to be focused on building the one thing that we were doing. And then one person gets some value from it and recommends you to someone else, and then someone recommends you to someone else. And so, yeah, it was very organic. I've never asked for it. And I feel I've learned more from those relationships than anyone's learned off me. I really value the pattern recognition of seeing behind the scenes, because you suddenly get access to proprietary information that you wouldn't otherwise, because they're asking for your help. And so you see inside their marketing functions, inside their brand, inside their technology functions. And so I've really valued that pattern recognition.
What do you see? There are some common traits of the people that you work with that have...
Oh, until you said that last word, I had a few ideas. One of the common traits of people I end up working with are people who know enough about marketing to be dangerous, but nothing more. And so they're usually CEOs of software businesses or agencies who are trying to build their business, but haven't done marketing previously. They've usually be on the sales side or the engineering side. And so they're usually very frustrated with a mid-level marketer that they've hired who isn't doing what they think they should be doing. And the frustration is absolutely from both sides, because then the mid-level marketer is saying, my CEO constantly walks over everything I do and tells me that they know what to do. And so that's a regular context that I walk into. And then it's usually about making sure I listen to both and I help frame it up from an external perspective. There's normally a bit of an enlargement of perspective that needs to come on both sides, and an understanding of where both of the value sits between the professional marketers within that organization and the CEO, who can really carry the vision and the story. And so that's one of the very common situations. The other very common situation is people that have set a goal that is far too big and are desperate. So people who have promised their investors or promised their teams or promised someone to 2x or 3x their business this year, and now are trying to find advisors to help them do it. And then in that case, the path to success is often one of saying, let's pop that bubble. Because if we just go chasing that, then it's either going to cost you X amount of money and resource, or Y amount of time, which you don't have. And so actually, why don't we think about this from a bottoms up perspective rather than a top down, and look at what naturally would have. Right now, I believe there are many businesses in the software space that are going bust because they are victims to their growth models rather than the market. There is some latent demand out there for what they could do, but rather than going and serving that demand, they've told their investors they can 3x their business and are spending so much money to go and try and do it. And the market just isn't there right now because of a whole bunch of macroeconomics. And so I think it's really important that we build models that are achievable as well as ones that are stretch. So those are two very common situations I come across.
Any words of wisdom for aspiring entrepreneurs out there?
For me, it comes down to a couple of key things. Firstly, we've talked a whole bunch across this conversation on proximity to the customer and being market-led. I think almost nothing can replace regular customer conversations. I serve Paddle as Chief Marketing Officer now. It would be very easy for me never to have a customer conversation, and yet multiple times a week, I am speaking one-to-one as well as in other groups with customers and with prospects. I feel one of the biggest gifts I can give my team is customer proximity. Of giving them the insight from those conversations, but also helping them to have those conversations themselves. So the first thing there for me is that proximity to the customer. And then the second thing is not falling in love too much with your own product or value proposition. When we start out, we have an idea and we believe in it so much, and actually customer proximity allows us to reshape that over time because the market changes. Many of our assumptions will be wrong, and those conversations lead us often down a path. We've talked about pivoting today, often down a path that isn't what you first interpreted. And maybe it's just I'm not smart enough to have an idea at the beginning that can be followed the whole way through. But most of our ideas need that tweaking on the journey. And so, yeah, the second thing I think is not to fall too much in love with your product. And if we were going to go for one more to make a perfect marketing threesome of advice, I believe strongly in resilience, and I believe that many businesses give up too early. So if you have an idea, if you've got some hope left in the tank, and founder energy is often the resource that's most valued in a startup, more than cash, more than a customer, more than some intellectual property, the founder's energy and hope for the future, confidence in the future, then I believe that we've got to build businesses that can survive long enough to succeed. And often there'll be portions of the journey where your only job is to survive until some tailwind comes along, or some market changes, or some customer comes on board. And I think a lot of people read the Substack newsletters or listen to podcasts that say everything is rosy and compare themselves with that, and it's just not reality. We've got to arm ourselves to go through months, quarters, sometimes even years of surviving before we get to success.
Andrew, we like to end our episodes with gratitude. Do you have anybody that you want to shout out to that has been absolutely instrumental in your journey and where you are today?
Well, Lydia, I'll be absolutely remiss if I didn't mention my wife. Absolute fantastic support through that entire journey.
These two, so yes, definitely.
So yeah, although we often laugh about the fact that sometimes when I'm on a call work-wise, I'm not talking the same language. She has been with me on every step of that journey, every bit of the risk, and she has understood and been welcoming towards that and encouraging towards that. And then I've just so valued so many friends, more than just advisors, friends along that journey. And I'm so glad that I've got people who've walked alongside me for 10, 15 years through that entrepreneurial journey. And there are many I could bring to mind. There's a small group of heads of sales and heads of marketing and former founders in London. We meet up once every 6 months for dinner and drinks together. And there's some fantastic people in that group that I regularly go back to for advice. So yeah, I feel making sure we've got that collective of people we can call on hard is really
brilliant. We're certainly grateful for you spending a little time with us and sharing some wisdom and your story. And it's fascinating. And it's always interesting. We learn more about a relative on a podcast here than we have over dinner. It's a different type of conversation. It's great.
And for anybody that has been inspired and want to reach out to you for any type of advice, what's the best way to reach you?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's normally the place that I start conversations. So yeah, feel free to grab me on LinkedIn, Andrew Davies, Paddle, and you'll find me.
Okay, we'll drop it in the show notes. And again, thanks so much, Andrew, and all the best to you. And until we see or speak again, have a great one.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Lydia.
For those of you joining us today, we hope you enjoyed this time in the Champions Corner as much as we did. Got some awesome takeaways, and most importantly, will take action to continue living your best life and maximizing your potential. Mindset is such an important aspect of life, and when coupled with action, delivers undeniably powerful results.
Please subscribe to the podcast to hear from more great guests and get the latest mindset mastery insights and cash flow matchups.
Again, thank you so much for investing your time with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Cashflow Fight Club podcast.